Live everywhere.
Daily Co's Radio on netrootsradio.com presents
David Walton. Kagro in the Morning Show. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, how you doing, everybody? Hey, it's Independence Day. How do you like that? July 4th, 2017. Welcome to the show. We're going to do a live show today. Barely functioning at this point, but why not? Independence Day. We'll declare our independence from doing the show with any sort of, I was going to say planning, but we're usually independent of any of that. But we are doing it live, that's true. Thanks very much, Justice, for waking up early and making sure we can get off to a good start. I woke up early and made sure my oldest son got off to a good start at, as I said in the Morning Post, I actually did it about 0400 rather than 0430 was our departure time from the rendezvous point, using all my tactical jargon to seem really cool and patriotic this morning. He's off to another adventure with his scout troop and having a great time. I'm sure he's probably about half an hour outside of landing from his flight that took off in the 6 o'clock hour this morning. Wow. So it feels like I've already been up and had a day already today. So no specific plans. Trying to catch up on things. Let's see. When I woke up early in the morning, I did find out that while I had been trying to sleep earlier, let's see, North Korea launched a giant missile. I guess testing their progress towards finalizing their ICBMs with which they hope to attack the United States eventually. And we all have to rely on Donald Trump to come up with the formula for how to respond to that and or prevent it from happening in the first place. So far, he's looking to China. He has given them delicious chocolate cake and figures that ought to be enough, I guess, to get out there and set things straight. So, okay, wonderful, fantastic. Let's see, we got to clear up some other news as well. And today makes a good day. Because we are independent of Greg Dworkin today, too, unfortunately. It's just not because it's Independence Day, but because it's Tuesday. But I'm hoping that he's enjoying a Independence Day off, as well as a day off from the radio, and listening along, and maybe have some suggestions for where we could go today. Got plenty, of course, in pocket. I say it's a good day for the backup of what we have in pocket because we haven't got Greg with us. Every day is a better day when we do have Greg with us because then we're catching up with the news. But every once in a while it serves its purpose when we have to do without Greg to allow us to wade into pocket a little bit and pull out a couple of longer read items, catch up on some other items that we didn't discuss the first time around. That have been waiting, or we're waiting for somehow a more appropriate time to bring some of these things up. Some of these things never have appropriate times ever, but lots to take a look at. You remember I mentioned to you the other day. Here's a follow up on my mention the other day, brief mention, and I think I read about half the article about one of the latest of Donald Trump's army of lawyers that he's signed on to help him with his Russia investigations and any of the broader offshoots that may come out of Special Counsel Robert Mueller's investigation. We're starting with Russia, but it could branch out into other things. And I think that that particular label for Sekulow is kind of out of date. We were talking about Jay Sekulow, about his being the latest hire, and he may be the latest hire, but I guess Trump is already discussing hiring on more attorneys. Exactly why, I'm not sure, but I suppose you can't have enough defense attorneys if you're him at this point. There's no reason not to just hire everybody. I don't know whether he thinks it's a little bit like divorce lawyers, where if he interviews every lawyer in America, then none of them can work on the investigation. I don't think it works quite the same way, but you never know what's going on in his head. Anyway, Jay Sekulow, I had brought up the article mentioning the fact, or focusing on the fact, that he has, that he too, he's a good match for Donald Trump because he too has his own and operates his own self-dealing charity that he uses to pay himself and many members of his family a rather handsome salary. Did I put this in? Let's see if it's in the archives. I know we discussed it at some point, and I gave you the basic outlines of it. He had started I don't know even how he described the charity, but it was essentially a conservative Christian-ish, I guess, quasi-religious organization, and they did battle in the social, what do we call it? The culture war venue, if you will, the theater of the culture war. Yeah, and essentially he was just he would use every culture war event to raise money and email people and snail mail people and telemarket to people. And say, if you want to be a part of the fight against whatever liberal outrage they've identified today, then send us $5, $10, whatever you can spare. And the focus of the article actually was less about the fact that he had a whole self-dealing charity set up, that it was about the pressure tactics that they used to get people who could ill afford it to part with their money so that they could have it. And they had, the investigative reporters there reprinted. I guess they got a hold of the actual call center scripts that laid out the options that the telemarketers had for talking people out of their money, even if they objected that they were too poor to pay anything, or that they were on a fixed income, or I just can't afford it right now, or whatever. Anyway, lots of pressure tactics. As it turns out, the family did fairly well with it. I think the last bit of reporting had revealed that Sekulow had paid himself or his family members something on the order of $60 million over a course of years. I don't know whether it was a 10-year window or what, but $60 million, however you slice it, in the lifetime of any human being, is going to be a pretty significant chunk of change, obviously. This follow-up piece is from The Guardian. I'm sorry, The Daily Beast. Yes, the pocket view of it before you get to the original. For some reason, it gives you that false lead. Why does it say that? The Guardian, by The Guardian, and then it says with the URL of The Daily Beast. Yeah, just a little weird technical glitch going on in Pocket, but you know about that. The Daily Beast is, in fact, the source here. Our writer is Kelly Wheel. I'm hoping is the pronunciation. Weill. This is really remarkable. Of course, as I said, $60 million is a remarkable figure. But most interesting is one of those $60 million, I think. It's this one. Jay Sekulow's son made close to $1 million from the family charity. Now, all by itself, that doesn't really, of course, tell the tale. And if it did, then Kelly wouldn't have gotten paid for this article, because this would all be, you could all say it in one sentence, and I don't see why anybody should get paid for that, unless you want to pay me for it. Fantastic. Jay Sekulow's son made close to $1 million from the family charity. The issue isn't that he got one of the 60 so much as it is that his son was 18 at the time. I mean, I don't know what to say about that. Mike Flynn, the spy, waited until his son was of, I don't know, something closer to respectable adult working age before pretending that he was in charge of their security consulting firm, which is, of course, a pretend job in the first place. But anyway, at 18, what could Jay Sekulow's son be doing at a religious nonprofit culture warrior kind of an operation that's worth $1 million? I don't know. But the subheader says Jay Sekulow appointed his son as a director of his religious nonprofit when the kid was just 18. His prior experience? Okay, he's got some experience, right? An internship at Nickelodeon. Well, that ordinarily wouldn't do it for me, but okay, let's see what they have to say. Kelly, take it away. Poor Christians opened their wallets to a religious nonprofit run by Donald Trump's lawyer, Jay Sekulow. In turn, Sekulow hired one of his own teenage sons straight out of a Nickelodeon internship He stole him away from Nickelodeon and named him a director of the charity, where the son subsequently earned nearly $1 million. And I don't even know whether he did anything, but even if he did, ordinarily it's really would be considered it's self-dealing and a crime right off the bat, really, if you're talking about paying the directors who are family members $1 million salary for being the director of a nonprofit. I mean, that's it doesn't matter who you pay, and it could be an outside director, but $1 million even for an outside director of a nonprofit board seems way out of whack with what ought to be permissible under the tax code. But okay, that's where we now stand. $1 million. Authorities in New York and North Carolina are investigating, thankfully, Sekulow's charity, Christian Advocates Serving Evangelism. Remember, CASE, C-A-S-E, Christian Advocates Serving Evangelism, following reports that the nonprofit doled out millions to Sekulow and his immediate family. On Tuesday, The Guardian revealed that the so-called charity led an aggressive telemarketing campaign asking impoverished Christians to sacrifice their money, or warning them that Islamic extremists are headed in your direction and you are most likely the main target. That's a nice fear tactic. Either give us money or ISIS will kill you. Well, how would ISIS find out who I am and where I live and what my phone number is? Well, we might tell them. Oh, well, that's mighty Christian of you. Here's $20. Over $886,000 of those donations from CASE and its related organizations was paid to Logan Sekulow, Jay's son. I don't like the name. Who was first named a CASE director when he was just 18. The Sekulow family has full control of CASE, which raked in $229 million in donations from 2011 to 2015 alone. I mean, I guess you can't fault them in any amoral sense. Anyway, absent morality, the stuff is working. You can see at least why they continue to do it. Imagine that, fleecing poor people in exchange for nothing, on promises of nothing, mostly about doing something about stories that are fake. $229 million from 2011 to 15. Wow. Well, that according to the Washington Post. Anyway, CASE solicited donations through an aggressive phone campaign, a script for CASE telemarketers obtained by The Guardian. That's how we accidentally attributed this story, I guess, to The Guardian. Instructed callers to pressure the poor for money. Could you possibly make a small sacrificial gift of even $20 within the next 3 weeks? The script instructed telemarketers to ask retirees, the unemployed, and other people who said they were too poor to give. The donations would go toward preserving, quote, our traditional Christian values, the script said. Now, unclear in all this is this just something that they did in randomly calling people, and if they pled poverty, they would, I know that's how you use the scripts, but I'm curious, it keeps coming back to the fact that they were asking such poor people. Did they buy a list of poor people? Did they intend to ask poor people? It would be counterintuitive, but I guess if you were able to squeeze $229 million out of them, it's a business practice worth considering if you're an amoral a-hole, for instance. So, I don't know. I guess I would recommend it. And as long as you fleece poor wingnuts, I don't know. I don't know whether I feel like I should stop you or not. Anyway, I guess I should, because we don't want the accumulation of all that money in the hands of rich, amoral a-holes. Leave it in the hands of poor, amoral a-holes, and they can fritter it away in smaller bits, and it's less effective, I guess. I don't know. Don't know who to root for in this. Root for injuries, like you do when the two teams you hate play. Okay. You don't do that? Me neither. What am I saying? I'm nicer than that. Okay, so we saw the script, and over $886,000 of those funds raised were paid to Logan Sekulow over 12 years, in his function as a director, according to tax documents. Interesting. So over 12 years. Does that mean he's from 18 to 20, to 30? Okay, so over 12 years, I mean, it's not as extravagant as I thought. I thought he was paying him $1 million a year. That would be horrific to pay an experienced person or an experienced person to serve on the board of directors of a charitable organization. But I guess but even so, they're still paying him something on like $80,000 a year to an 18-year-old kid for probably do nothing. Just vote the way Dad votes and be quiet, and I'll put, $75,000 in your hands. Anyway, wow. So, Logan, who did not return the Daily Beast's email, voicemail, or Twitter messages. You gotta really aggressively telemarket that guy if you want to get through. First appeared in Case's tax filings in 2004 when he was listed as a director of the nonprofit. At the time, Logan was just 18 years old, and his professional experience consisted of an internship at Nickelodeon earlier that year, according to his LinkedIn page. I was going to make a joke about him working on that show where they pour slime on your head, but that was actually it. He worked on the show Slime Time Live, he said in a blog post for his alma mater, Full Sail University. That is a very famous, super, really top-notch, good Full Sail University. Full Sail University, I've actually heard of. I'll tell you how. The eldest boy who's away on his big adventure today was assigned the task, I don't know, maybe 9th grade, could have been early in 10th grade, assigned the task of, coming up with some proposed career paths and the courses of study that he thought might be appropriate training for those career paths, and finding 3 universities, colleges or universities, where one might obtain undergraduate training relevant to that proposed career path. And about 75% of the males in his class, he decided, a super appropriate and totally realistic career would be in video games, whether that's playing video games professionally or designing video games. And I think this was about the time when he figured, maybe I can make video games for a living. I think he's since come to the conclusion that the actual making of the coding of those video games is probably not where his true love of video games lies. But at any rate, at the time, he decided that video game creation was something, and I guess in his online research, he came up with Full Sail University as being one of the 3, and I can't remember what the other 3 were, that could offer him an appropriate technical background in video game design. And I have a suspicion that that's on purpose, and that at Full Sail University, their marketing department, I'm just guessing here, I might be totally off base, but I'm just guessing that they might have decided that the thing to do in starting this place up was market themselves. What if we marketed ourselves using search engine optimization as the university, let's say, perhaps for-profit university, where young men might go if they aspired to be in video gaming professionally. I could see them making an awful lot of money that way, and fooling an awful lot of people. Although, who knows, maybe they're turning out the most video game professionals of any university in the United States per capita. After all, it's not partial sale, it's Full Sail. That is an odd name for a university. Anyway, Logan Sekulow's curiously incomplete IMDb page, which notes his height to 1/2 inch, says he made an appearance on Slime Time Live as Logan the Intern. So look it up. In a statement to The Guardian, the Sekulow spokesperson said the nonprofit's payouts were all legal, and I guess if they chop it up into $75,000 blocks, it probably is. The financial arrangements between sister nonprofit American Center for Law and Justice, Case, and all related entities are regularly reviewed by outside independent compensation experts and have been determined to be reasonable, spokesperson Gene Kapp said. In addition, each entity has annual independent outside audits performed by certified public accounting firms. Further, the IRS has previously conducted audits of the ACLJ, not the ACLU, but the ACLJ, that's only part of a U, and Case, and found them to be in full compliance of all applicable tax laws. And I guess that's, if you do it $75,000 a year, you won't get red flagged for the directorship's salary that way, unless, of course, they know, well, even if they do know that the director is 18, I don't think they'll really even bother getting into a dispute about the qualifications of a particular director. It's just an easy way to give your kids lots of money that you grifted off of other people without getting dinged for it. Logan's starting salary at Case was a modest $21,475 in 2004. That is much more modest, isn't it? According to tax filings. That figure rose slightly in subsequent years. By 2007, he was making $54,849 before skyrocketing to $171,126 in compensation from Case and its related organizations in 2008 filings show. That is a steep curve, to be sure. And only at the end of the 2008 curve does he begin flirting with excessive compensation. Although, even for an 18-year-old, even $21,475 is probably way too steep. And, of course, it's got a pretty big impact on an 18-year-old. Whew. Anyway, I see they did it in a measured sort of a way. Anyway. Okay, let's see. We'll continue on and see what else we can discover about the situation here. Logan's exact duties in his father's nonprofit are unclear. He is listed as an executive producer on a handful of documentaries produced by Case's sister company, the conservative ACLJ, which his father, Jay Sekulow, also heads. The films include The Export, a powerful examination of radical Islam's multifaceted attack on our freedoms, including the proposed Ground Zero Mosque in New York City. That super scary thing. Okay. Well, at any rate, interesting. So he's a film producer now because he was on the Slime Show. Anyway, besides a LinkedIn item which lists him as executive producer, and director, wow, what he really should do is direct, at ACLJ Films, Logan's public profile makes little mention of the nonprofit job that earned him nearly $1 million. Instead, his profiles show what he bought while working as a Case director. Really? How interesting. Including a now defunct minor league basketball team. Well done. Anyway, he recently acquired a long-running podcast on Disney World tourism. Acquired it. He didn't make it. He acquired it. Okay. And directed As Dreamers Do, a religious-themed film about the life of Walt Disney. He's into Disney. That's just great. The film's most common rating on IMDb is 1 out of 10 stars. A truly appalling film. Possibly the worst I've ever seen. One of the film's 19 reviews reads, that's nice. An abomination, another reads. It is offensive to anyone who has studied Disney history and admires the man behind the mouse. Wow. They're not even political attacks, or at least so it would seem. They're well disguised. It's all a big conspiracy, you see. I found myself shaking from how poor it was in every sense of imagination, reads a third. That is an awkward sentence, but it's also very funny. Despite his considerable Case income, Sekulow relied on crowdfunding for at least 2 creative endeavors. In March 2015, he launched a Kickstarter for Laugh-O-Gram, a weekly newspaper exclusively featuring classic and brand new comic strips. Recycling old comic strips. Okay. The Kickstarter raised over $16,000 before Laugh-O-Gram shuttered the following year with an apology. Oh, I have that sound effect. An apology. Yeah, I gotta work on remixing that one day. The apology to Kickstarter donors who hadn't received their full year package. Sekulow presumably kept the money since Kickstarter doesn't offer refunds for failed campaigns, but said he sent free merchandise to donors, so that's what they were after in the first place. He also ran a failed Kickstarter campaign to create the Rubens Cube, not to be confused with Rubik's Cube, I guess, a Rubik's Cube with a picture of a Reuben sandwich on it. This is a super genius. Wow. I mean, holy mackerel. They are adept at the grift. I guess once you get the taste in your mouth, like blood for a shark, You just never give up, right? I'm a Rubik's Cube. That's like he's high one night. What if it was a Rubik's Cube, man? And it had a picture of a Reuben, and only when you could solve it could you find out. And then you'd be like so hungry. Oh, I'm surprised they didn't partner it up with like an app for like Grubhub or something. And then we'll deliver you a Reuben when you solve it. It's a web-enabled smart Rubik's Cube. Once you complete the puzzle, a real live Reuben sandwich, not live, but formerly live, Reuben sandwich is delivered to your doorstep within 1 hour if you live in a major metropolitan area, and let's say it might take up to 3 days for the rest of the country to get their Reuben sandwich, at which point they'll say, oh my God, what is this crap sandwich? I don't even understand what's on it. And you got me off of farmersonly.com for this terrible sandwich? It's almost as if it wasn't worth solving the Rubik's Cube, which it wasn't. Anyway, that campaign, by the way, earned $846 of its $6,500 goal, an ambitious goal at that, but $846 was coughed up. This must have taught him a great deal about the power of grift. If the fact that $1 million that was being available to him from his dad, who didn't pay it out of his own pocket but took it from other people's pocket, if that didn't teach him, then I guess having some number of people give you $846 because you made a Rubik's Cube joke has got to turn you on to the grifting life. The failed campaign still earned the equivalent of over 40 of the small sacrificial gifts that case telemarketers asked of people too poor to give. And I guess I'm hopeful that possibly at least people who give on Kickstarter are aware that they're giving to something stupid. And if they want to give away $20 because it tickles their funny bone, or however you want to express it, I guess that's okay. Although some of those people were probably too poor to give that money up too, but they were just similarly high, I guess. But look, you're wasting your disposable income on something. It might as well be funding Rubik's Cubes. Wow. Well, although it's depressing, isn't it? Especially when you're in the business of, say, putting together a product like this one. And not that this podcast is super useful or anything, and it certainly doesn't deliver any sandwiches to anybody. Though it could. We could make that, you know what? That would probably make this show worth it to Silicon Valley, because it's such a stupid claim. This is the only podcast that's web-enabled to order you a Domino's pizza, which is terrible. I don't know. It's just got to come up with something, I guess. Like Uber, but for podcasting that has nothing to do with going anywhere. Is that good? Can I make that work? But it's depressing to think about, the fact that every once in a while when we remember to beg people for money to keep this podcast going, it trickles in, but I mean, this guy once made a Rubik's Cube joke and made $850 out of it. And though that's not much, I mean, it's about what we're able to put together monthly. I mean, I could should I make worse jokes and threaten to make more unless more people send money? Is that something to do? Should I just be out there? Maybe I should just move over. I can keep this going as the labor of love and just move over into Kickstarter. And I think I can come up with one stupid idea a month that people would waste their money on. Oh well. It's annoying that people like that, who already have $1 million in the bank for doing nothing, can come up with things like that. But that's a complaint for another day. We have too much that we can get to and inform you and entertain you with to linger any longer on the Rubik's Cube. That's good. I got to give him credit. I laugh at it every time. Thinking about the money makes me a little angry, though. Okay, here's new news. Something we ought to cover because we talk about guns and gun fail fairly frequently, and I don't think there's any jokes whatsoever in this one. Although I'm not certain how well the legal ruling will hold up. I've heard some doubts expressed about it. Let's get right to the story. McClatchy's D.C. Bureau is reporting this one. Where's the headline, McClatchy? They put it in a weird place. Miami judge rules Florida's new stand your ground law is unconstitutional. That's the important part. Unconstitutional. New, I dispute, but that's just a a differing view of news cycles, I guess. These are old school McClatchy guys, and the law being like 5 years old makes it new in their view, I guess. David Ovale, O-V-A-L-L-E, everybody with the exotic names today, tells us, well, maybe he's the old school guy. I don't know if he's an older guy or younger guy. If you're familiar with him, he's a writer at the Miami Herald. Let me know. I imagine almost in the old days, when I was a kid, everybody in Miami was old. Now, of course, they're young and hip and salsa dancing, I guess. I don't know. I'm out of touch with that stuff. Anyway, here's the story. Florida's updated, stand your ground self-defense law is unconstitutional. A Miami judge ruled on Monday. Miami-Dade Circuit Judge Milton Hirsch, that does sound like an old school Miami-Dade Circuit Judge, doesn't it? Milton Hirsch ruled that lawmakers overstepped their authority in modifying the law. That's the new thing. This year, they're dead on. He's just a regular old reporter. He's not old school and gritty or anything. He's just telling it like it is. The new modified law this year, I guess, forced prosecutors to disprove a defendant's claim at a pretrial hearing. I think I've read some part of that out of there. Miami-Dade Circuit Judge Milton Hirsch ruled that lawmakers overstepped their authority in modifying the law this year to force prosecutors, I did write it right, to disprove a defendant's self-defense claim at a pretrial hearing. In other words, they've gone even further from the availability of a pretrial plea of self-defense not necessitating trial if, and I wasn't clear on the details of Florida's law, and maybe Armando is, and you can tell me if you are, Armando, and we'll include you in the discussion, but that's pretty interesting. So now you actually have to the prosecutor has to be able to disprove a self-defense claim at a pretrial hearing in order to get to trial. It's not even a matter of leaving it for the jury to decide whether or not they believe the plea of self-defense. The judge, again, Milton Hirsch, ruled that under Florida's Constitution, that change should have been crafted by the Florida Supreme Court and not the legislature. As a matter of constitutional separation of powers, that procedure cannot be legislatively modified, Hirsch wrote in a 14-page order. That's fun, but that does not strike me as correct. I think that's practically backwards. I mean, I would stand behind the right of the Florida Supreme Court to make that demand and to find that and establish it as a test to be applied to all stand your ground proceedings. But I can't see any reason why the state legislature couldn't mandate such a test. But I don't know. I mean, I'm not an expert in the Florida Constitution either. I guess under the federal Constitution, I wouldn't have any problem with the legislature crafting that test. It's well within their rights, I think. But okay, let's see if there's any more on the argument here. The ruling is a victory for prosecutors, and maybe that's why. If in that sense it may stand, but the ruling is a victory for prosecutors who have firmly opposed a law they believe makes it easier for defendants to get away with murder and other violent crime, which it does. That was its point. The idea really being, why should a white person who shoots a black person, hopefully, in their view, have to waste their time defending themselves when, after all, didn't you hear me? I said he was white and the other guy was black, and so therefore that's a justified shooting, because everyone knows at least that it's absolutely justifiable for a white guy to be afraid for his life whenever he sees a black guy. So, but we've talked about this in the past about exactly, technically speaking, what this was doing. Besides making it easier to murder people, the mechanism that they were using was saying, we're no longer going to even bother asking juries, do you believe the stories being told here? It's designed so that, whoever it is, the defendant in the lawful use or claimed lawful use of his awesome Second Amendment powers is so well within his rights because Second Amendment rights are so broad and unimpeachable in any sense that basically the fact that a law-abiding gun owner used his weapon in any way, shape, or form is pretty much a prima facie assumption of innocence and rightness, and so much so that we think that there ought to be a pre-trial trigger that can let him off the hook before we even get too far into our legal proceedings. Now, I guess it's even harder. They were finding too often people who made claims of self-defense and having feared for their lives, and that's why they drew their weapons and fired, were too often being forced to make that argument to a jury that was entitled to decide that they didn't believe him. And that was the scary part. And that could tie you up for a long time. And after all, you probably are a small businessman somewhere else, and that's the backbone of America, and we should let you off the hook as soon as possible. All right, so let's see. Here's the worst part here, I guess. Hirsch's ruling isn't binding. Other trial courts across Florida can follow the law if they choose, but it does get the ball rolling on the appeals process and possibly getting the law reviewed by the Florida Supreme Court. That's not much. Senator Rob Bradley, a Republican of Fleming Island, told the Miami Herald he believes the legislature acted lawfully. I would be surprised if this decision were upheld at the appellate level, says Bradley, a former prosecutor who championed the modification of the already controversial Stand Your Ground statute passed over a decade ago. See, I knew it was old. The change was pushed by the politically powerful National Rifle Association. You will not be surprised to find out. Governor Rick Scott signed the new law into effect last month. First passed in 2005, Florida's controversial self-defense law has been criticized for fostering a shoot-first mentality and giving killers a pass at justice. Well, a pass, it's not a pass at justice, but a pass from justice anyway. The law eliminated a citizen's duty to retreat before using deadly force to counter an apparent threat. Plus, of course, made it easy to avoid trial altogether. That was the more problematic thing. Although they now use the words more problematic. More problematic for prosecutors, the law made it easier for judges before even getting to a jury to dismiss criminal charges if they deemed someone acted in self-defense. The Florida Supreme Court later ruled that defendants, in asking for immunity from criminal prosecution, must be the ones to prove they were acting in self-defense. And why not? In Miami-Dade, judges have thrown out several high-profile murder cases after pretrial immunity hearings, but have also allowed many more to go to a jury. But the NRA-backed bill passed in May despite fierce opposition by prosecutors and gun control advocates, upended the legal framework. Once again, I would add, upended the legal framework. Now, at those pretrial hearings, prosecutors shoulder the burden of disproving a defendant's self-defense claim. And it's not that that's a terrible thing to ask prosecutors to have to do. It's just, why don't you do it at trial? State attorneys contend it essentially forces them to unfairly try the case twice, making it easier for criminals to skate on violent charges. Under the law, prosecutors must prove by clear and convincing evidence that a defendant was not acting in self-defense. Hirsch found that the changes to the law were procedural, meaning only the Florida Supreme Court has the right to make them. Oh, that is an interesting argument. I guess that's I hadn't considered that, and I don't know whether that's a correct reading of how they divvy things up under the Florida Constitution or not, but at least it makes a little bit more sense as a ruling going forward. Hirsch ruled on the case of Lilitha Rutherford, or Lilitha, perhaps, Rutherford, who was accused of aggravated assault for pulling a gun on a couple during an argument, and Omar Rodriguez, the so-called neighbor from hell, who shot and killed a man after a confrontation over dog poop. That would be, it's a low priority killing right there. The separate immunity hearings will still be held in the coming weeks, but it will be up to Rutherford and Rodriguez to prove their self-defense claims. That's going to be a tough one on the dog poop part, I think. Who knows? If either were to lose their bid at immunity, they could appeal to the 3rd District Court of Appeals and ultimately to the Florida Supreme Court. It was not surprising that Hirsch was the first to weigh in on a new law. Since becoming a judge in 2010, He's often ruled on broader legal issues that sometimes upend conventional norms. He's a big thinker, I guess. Earlier this year, the judge ruled that Miami-Dade County's inmate detention policy, spurred by President Donald Trump's threats to withhold funding, violated the Constitution. Last year, Hirsch also ruled that a new death penalty sentencing structure was unconstitutional, a decision that later proved prescient. The Florida Supreme Court ruled the same months later. In 2012, Hirsch ruled that prosecutors could not say a fingerprint found at a crime scene was a controversial match, a decision later overturned by an appeals court. And when a Tampa federal judge ruled in 2011 that Florida's drug law was unconstitutional, Hirsch was the only local state judge to follow suit. He tossed out more than 24 cases, but Miami's appeals court later reversed Hirsch's decision. Well, interesting, and so tenuous case here, and on a little bit of shaky ground, but it's interesting to see the law being challenged, especially this new revised law. I mean, the old one was bad enough. The new revised one I didn't even know about, but especially worth, I think, testing at every possible level. So why the hell not? Go for it, Judge Hirsch. Okay, let's see. Other items that might make a good Independence Day, sort of a freebie of a show. Very often an easy day to take off, but everybody's sleeping late because of our early morning rising for the send-off today. So let's see what else we can cram in there. If you're even bothering to wake up and listen to the show, which you might not be, you might be sleeping in, but hopefully you're joining us for the podcast to see what you missed out on. Let's see. Where to go with all these? There's lots of esoterica. There's some in-depth opinion pieces about items we've discussed in the past. Some things straight out of left field that might be interesting. All right. How about this one? Maybe this might even wake Armando up. And it's okay, Armando, if you're sleeping in. It's not absolutely essential that you join us every time I think you might enjoy a story. You can just sit there and enjoy it like everybody else. This is an interesting one. Back to lawfare. We're spending a lot of time over in lawfare these days. Jane Chong has written this one, and we're back on the issue of emoluments. This was an interesting piece here. Reading the Office of Legal Counsel on emoluments. Do super rich presidents get a pass? Interesting question to be asking. I mean, we just happen to have a president who claims to be super rich and who claims to be able to get himself a pass on emoluments. Let's see what she's talking about here. I wrote last November, Jane says, that the Foreign Emoluments Clause, quote, is on its face a national security provision designed to protect the country from officers to enmeshed with foreign interests, unquote. If the Justice Department's recent court filing is to be believed, what are they filing in? I don't know, but it's a good, it's a link to the filing. Let's see if we can find out a little bit more about it. That's a PDF. I don't even dare start with that. If the Justice Department's recent court filing is to be believed, that protection is exceedingly limited. This new position marks a decisive break from the more conscientious approach long espoused by both the Comptroller General and the Office of Legal Counsel. There's no doubt that the new interpretation of the Emoluments Clause under the Trump so-called administration, I guess, is, well, obviously they're going to cheat in his favor, but they're going to really have to bend over backwards in order to make it work, because there's really no sense in which Donald Trump ought to be able to collect these obvious emoluments without landing himself in enormous legal trouble. But the OLC, I guess, sees it as their task to keep him out of that legal trouble, so they're just whitewashing the whole thing. What's happening? At the heart of the emoluments controversy is President Trump's refusal to liquidate his business holdings. You know that. He has instead maintained ownership of the Trump Organization, a multi-billion-dollar, supposedly, umbrella company with thousands of domestic and international investments, and placed the assets in a revocable trust managed by his sons Donald Jr. and Eric Trump. Trump now faces 3 lawsuits alleging that he is profiting from his business empire in violation of the Constitution. 3 days after his inauguration, Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics in Washington, or CREW, a government accountability watchdog group, filed the first suit in the Southern District of New York. This month, 2 more complaints were filed by the Attorneys General of Washington, D.C. and Maryland. We read about that. And 196 congressional Democrats in federal courts in Maryland and the District of Columbia, respectively. All 3 suits center on the meaning and scope of the Foreign Emoluments Clause, which provides that no person holding any office of profit or trust under them shall, without the consent of Congress, accept any present, emolument, office, or title of any kind whatever from any king, prince, or foreign state. That, of course, according to the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8. Citing Trump's business dealings with state governments and federal agencies, such as its lease on the old post office building that now houses the Trump International Hotel, which shouldn't be called the Trump International Hotel, it should be called the Mechanics Lien International Hotel, in my opinion. They own it. 2 of the suits also allege violations of the Domestic Emoluments Clause. This provision applies specifically to the president and provides that he shall receive for his services a fixed compensation during his tenure and not any other emolument from the United States or any of the states. That Clause 7 of the this time Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7. The emoluments clauses are spread out, dispersed throughout the Constitution, apparently. Serious procedural challenges like standing notwithstanding. That's funny. Standing notwithstanding. That's cute. Given the House and Senate's failure to address head-on the risks posed by Trump's financial conflicts again, can't really write like that, but okay, we'll concentrate on the legal analysis. The lawsuits could prove important in forcing a much-needed conversation. Is Trump taking in profits in violation of the Constitution? I would like to have that conversation. Just as critically, are future presidents entitled to pull a Trump? Or does the Constitution dictate that they, like Jimmy Carter, must sell their family peanut farms as a condition of taking office? Back when people cared about how they would be viewed if they didn't do such things, they did those things. Here, obviously, not the same. He doesn't care, and he considers it winning. No Article 3 court has ever rendered an opinion on how either emoluments clause should be interpreted, though the Supreme Court has offered interpretations, dang it, you're doing this to me over and over again, of the term emoluments as it appears in foreign emoluments-related statutes periodically enacted by Congress since 1881. Because of the limited judicial precedent, the internal memoranda from the Comptroller General and the Office of Legal Counsel that have been made public over the years are among the most important sources of guidance we have on emoluments issues. And though these memoranda do not directly address the question posed by the Trump business empire, because no one has ever tried to do anything stupid enough, as stupid as this, I guess, making some amount of inference and legwork necessary, in critical respects they quite clearly contradict the sweeping defense that the Justice Department put forward this month in its 70-page motion to dismiss the CREW case against Trump. The key issue in these suits, once you get behind a set of justiciability questions that may prove dispositive, is what constitutes an emolument. Though with respect to the Foreign Emoluments Clause, there's also some disagreement about what kind of entity constitutes a foreign state. Interesting. In plain English, if you can believe it, we are looking at an exotic presidential twist on the biggest and oldest challenge to enforcing any anti-corruption law. What counts? Do the forbidden emoluments cover only goodie boxes, blatant quid pro quo arrangements, and employment-related compensation? Or are the profits that Trump enjoys by way of his business transactions also prohibited when they come from foreign states and domestic government entities? And if the latter, more expansive definition is the appropriate one, are the profits prohibited only when the take is in excess of fair market value? And if so, does that definition serve as a meaningful limitation when at issue are luxury goods whose value or sales may be inflated by the fact that Trump is president and the products are prominently branded with his name. This is a very interesting, it's very insightful, laying out all these various aspects of the case that would have to be decided. Some lines would have to be drawn in all of this. Predictably, the dispute has taken the form of a battle for the original meaning of emoluments. An array of historical materials support both a limited and broad definition. Great. That's helpful. The two possible interpretations are well summed up by the Oxford English Dictionary, which provides two definitions dating back to the founding. One, profit or gain arising from station, office, or employment. Or two, advantage, benefit, or comfort. The Justice Department, like Trump's lawyers at Morgan Lewis, latches on to the first definition to argue that the emoluments clause, both of them, the emoluments clauses, apply only to the receipt of compensation for personal services and to the receipt of honors and gifts based on official position. That is, President Trump is precluded only from receiving benefits in exchange for services provided to a foreign state in his official capacity as president. Or, and this is crucial, given the subject matter of the OLC opinions, services provided in a capacity akin to an employee of a foreign state. In other words, if you were simply to offer them a hotel room and they were to say, I will pay for that $100 a night hotel room at the rate of $1,000 a night, that wouldn't count as an emolument because all he's doing is offering a hotel room in the ordinary course of business and somebody decided to overpay for it. The emoluments the OLC thinks are the ones that count is if the foreign entity says, rather than buying a hotel room at inflated prices, I'll give you $10,000 if you waive trade sanctions against me or give me some concrete policy outcome. That is to say, use your office to affect policy in our favor. That I guess they would still consider a foreign emolument. Although I imagine that if Trump pressed them on it, they would try to find a way to waive that too. The plaintiffs in the three suits, on the other hand, argue for a much more expansive definition. Me too. Marshalling its own set of historical evidence, Crew asserts that emoluments are anything of value, including money, permits, approvals, tax benefits, any other benefits, and anything else monetary or non-monetary, regardless of whether it is given in exchange for goods or services, and regardless of whether it is part of a transaction at, above, or below market rates. That is pretty expansive. And I know my own experience with reading about, self-dealing issues and a number of other tax issues and our favorite fiscal term here, fungibility, brings me back to the Supreme Court cases on which inexplicably the Republicans relied in underpinning what became the Istook Amendment, another of my favorite hobby horses, when they were insisting that the federal powers, regulatory powers, reached any funds in the account of a tax-exempt charitable organization, because, or rather, well, actually, they were trying to exempt them, the tax-exempt organizations from these things, but it made no possible sense whatsoever. But they were talking about, they were using the cases in a very narrow way to try to, do you remember the Istook Amendment? They were trying to prohibit federal grantees from lobbying because the argument was the federal grantees were being subsidized by the federal government and they should not be allowed to use their federal subsidies to lobby for yet more federal subsidies. And that would have to be the case since money is fungible. Any money in their account that came originally from a federal grant was indistinguishable from any other dollar in the account because of that fungibility. And so it all had to be considered as having come from a federal grant. They could not have segregated funds that they could use for continued lobbying. It wasn't going to work. And they were relying there for that definition of fungibility on some Supreme Court cases and ignoring, for whatever reason, the fact that those Supreme Court cases also stood for the proposition that any tax exemption as what might be offered, or is in fact offered, and is the chief benefit of being a certified 501c3 or C4 tax-exempt charitable organization, the tax exemptions ought to be considered, for all intents and purposes, to be federal grants. They are grants in the amount of dollars not required to be handed over in the form of taxation if you're tax exempt. Whatever you're exempt from is for the purposes of those cases that they cited, considered a federal grant. Now, conservatives would no doubt go crazy over that part of the ruling now because it gives the federal government license to leverage every dollar that's in your pocket if you take any sort of income tax deduction whatsoever, exemption, deduction, refund, what have you. Now, all the rest of your dollars are fungible with those dollars, and you know they'd never stand for that. Anyway, well, that was their idea, and so I guess it's no surprise that Crew would pick up on that and basically say, look, if you're getting anything of value, money, permits, approvals, tax benefits, what have you, if you're getting them from a government, our government, some other foreign government, what have you, then they're fungible with all the dollars in your pocket. We don't know which dollars came from your private investment and which ones came from foreign governments or even domestic governmental units. It's all the same. And as long as it's of some value to you, whether it came in the form of tax benefits or permits or what have you, it allowed other dollars to remain in your pocket. If you were given something for free, the market value of it, however you want to determine it, is still in your pocket because you didn't have to fork it over for anything, for the purpose of obtaining that item. Simple enough. I mean, it's actually annoyingly complex and overbroad, but that's where it stands. Anyway, we'll continue with the much better expressed, I think, legal reasoning here in our lawfare piece. A close examination of the relevant comptroller and OLC opinions reveal that the current Justice Department is reading the emoluments clauses too narrowly, while Crew and other plaintiffs are reading them too broadly. Oh my, both sides are at fault here. None of the opinions approves the receipt of benefits that can even arguably be attributed to the prestige or influence conferred by an office, and together they do not support the Justice Department's claim that presidents may, as a categorical matter, collect profits from business transactions with foreign entities and domestic government entities as long as a fair value is extracted on both sides. But notwithstanding the plaintiff's hard pull in the other direction, the opinions also suggest that presidents may, in limited cases, accept certain fixed benefits, as I will explain. These might be pensions from the U.S. state that used to employ them, or money damages from a foreign country against which, in a past life, they successfully won a judgment. That's rather hypothetical, but I guess it's as good as any. The key is that those benefits cannot be subject to foreign or domestic government manipulation or adjustment in connection with the presidential office. Okay. Fair enough. This happens to be a sensible position that accords with what the opinions repeatedly underscore as the purpose of the emoluments clauses and the ultimate touchstone for interpreting their meaning: to prevent corruption and foreign influence, and to bar payments which have a potential of influencing or corrupting the integrity of the recipient. So, what about that part of why the language about emoluments is easily misused? Our next section here. A threshold issue, before turning to the OLC literature, is the confusion created by cherry-picking historical materials without consideration of the factual context. Yes, you don't want to do that, do you? For example, in its motion to dismiss, the Justice Department followed the lead of some scholars in pulling some Supreme Court language that suggests the term emoluments applies only to salary and other duty-related benefits. Most notably in Hoyt v. United States, a case from 1850, the court defines emoluments as every species of compensation or pecuniary profit derived for a discharge of the duties of office. That's where she adds emphasis here. But in Hoyt, the Supreme Court was specifically asked to decide what constitutes an emolument of office per a statute governing Treasury Department collectors in their official capacity. The case did not require the court to consider or rule on the existence of emoluments of other kinds. This is a key point for purposes of properly construing any comptroller or OLC opinion that cites Hoyt and regurgitates its definition of emoluments. These opinions, like Hoyt, have to be read with an eye to their facts. They do not assert that emoluments must derive directly from discharge of duty. Rather, the kind of emoluments at issue in those opinions was the kind derived for discharge of duty. As a consequence, the reliance on Hoyt in these opinions does not serve as evidence of a limiting principle for emoluments in general. In short, as pointed out by the plaintiffs and assorted scholars, the proper question for purposes of discerning the historical scope of emoluments is not whether the term could be interpreted in a restricted way to refer only to benefits derived from discharging the duties of an office, but whether it was necessarily so interpreted at the time the emoluments clauses were drafted. Woo! As John McHale has painstakingly documented, the answer is no, and we don't have to look at secondary sources, however authoritative, for instance, Black's Law Dictionary, an easy basic reference tool for lawyers, to draw that conclusion. Consider, for example, some of the constitutions ratified during the first two major waves of state constitution making in the founding decade. Several included, quote, common benefits clauses that use the word emoluments in a way that simply defies narrow interpretation. The Pennsylvania Constitution of 1776 provides that government is or ought to be instituted for the common benefit, protection, and security of the people, nation, or community, and not for the particular emolument of advantage of any single man, family, or set of men, which they at the time spelled with two T's, interestingly enough, who are a part only of that community. Very similar language appears in the Virginia 1776 Constitution, Vermont's 1777 Constitution, and New Hampshire's 1784 Constitution. Far more elaborate historical arguments demonstrating the broad use of the term have been presented elsewhere, and there are a few of them linked. The bottom line is that there is an abundance of primary founding era material making use of the broad definition of emoluments, so it's wrong to use language from fact-bound case law to assert that the term is an inherently limited one. That's a little complex, but that's what you need to, what do you need to remember for a cocktail conversation? If you're basing your definition of emoluments on interpretations of the Hoyt decision, you're in the wrong ballpark. The Hoyt court was asked to interpret the propriety of a very specific kind of emolument, and the definition that it used wasn't meant to be a definition of the constitutional clauses that use the words emolument. They were simply deciding on a very particular kind of emolument that Treasury officials were at the time found to be accepting. That definition was factual, it was true, but it wasn't ever meant to be the end-all, be-all interpretation of the two emoluments clauses in the Constitution. They were simply describing what Treasury officials were taking, deciding that they were illegally granted, and describing those gifts as emoluments, nothing else. Okay, moving on, the plaintiffs define emoluments too broadly. What about these three lawsuits, and how far afield are they getting? Does it mean, as plaintiffs assert, that all types of benefits conferred on the president by foreign countries and U.S. states are prohibited emoluments? According to the comptroller and OLC opinions, clearly not. A number of opinions explain that officers do not need to forego fixed benefits to which they are entitled for reasons manifestly unrelated to and uninfluenced by their current, office. This is a common-sense interpretation of the clauses that avoids rigidity for rigidity's sake, where denial of benefits would do nothing to serve the clause's anti-corruption and anti-influence purpose. I don't know if she gives some examples here. Oh, okay, here we are. For instance, the comptroller and the OLC each independently concluded that President Ronald Reagan, St. Ronald Reagan, could collect ordinary retirement benefits from California, where he had served as, believe it or not, you remember this? The state governor. Yes, it's true. Without violating the domestic emoluments clause's prohibition against the receipt of emoluments from a state. In its 1983 opinion, the comptroller determined that President Reagan's pension from California cannot be construed as being in any manner received in consequence of his possession of the presidency. True. Coming to the same conclusion in its earlier 1981 opinion, the OLC also noted that those retirement benefits are not emoluments in the constitutional sense, and their receipt does not violate the spirit of the Constitution. To support its reasoning, the OLC in turn relied on a 1964 opinion, not published, where it similarly decided the estate of President Kennedy was entitled to the naval retirement pay that it had accrued during his presidency. He set it aside, I guess. Interpreting the Foreign Emoluments Clause in light of its basic purposes and principles, it concluded he could receive payments to which he was entitled as a matter of law prior to his taking office. Was that really a Foreign Emoluments Clause decision? Okay. Anyway, the same principles support allowing officers to collect on certain kinds of money judgments, even from foreign powers. In a 1955 opinion, the comptroller decided that an attorney in the Justice Department could receive a lump sum payment and lifetime annuity from the German government for his wrongful removal from the judgeship he held before he emigrated to the United States, as provided by German indemnification legislation. He was a judge in Germany, eh? All right. The comptroller reasoned that those payments did not constitute emoluments from his former office, but rather represent damages payable as a direct result of a moral and legal wrong. Turning to its spirit of the Constitution analysis, the comptroller had no trouble determining the payments were not problematic. They were obviously not intended to influence him as an officer of the United States. They were made under laws not specific to him. They were not payments voluntarily made by the German government, but rather mandatory indemnification required by the Allied powers. In a 1954 opinion on the same matter, the OLC came to a slightly different place. The payments were not permitted to the extent that they amounted to German retiree benefits, but like the comptroller, it found that damages intended to redress injury were not prohibited emoluments. Note what these opinions have in common. They generally allow the officer in question to collect payments or benefits that patently have nothing to do with and cannot possibly have been affected by his U.S. office. That 1983 comptroller opinion put it best and contains a line worth repeating. President Reagan was entitled to his pension because it couldn't be construed as being in any manner received in consequence of his possession of the presidency. In other words, if he had lost the presidency, California would still be paying him that pension. And in fact, those pension benefits would be fixed whether he won the presidency, lost the presidency, resigned the presidency, was impeached from the presidency. It's not dependent on that. And in Trump's case, of course, we're talking about payments that we think are being made to him, whether as outright gifts or to rent hotel rooms or whatever. It is in the hotels bearing his name. It's arguable that people are only renting those ballrooms or taking those hotel rooms in Trump hotels because he is the president and they want to make an impression on him. Whereas if it was somehow provable that they would be using the Trump hotel ballroom for the National Day of Bahrain, had he lost and lost badly to Hillary Clinton, which he did, but the Electoral College notwithstanding. But had he lost the Electoral College vote as well, would Bahrain have relocated its National Day celebration to Trump Hotel? It's, I guess, entirely possible. But you'd look like an idiot trying to make that argument in court, I think. Still, you never know. Applying this general rule, this section concludes, it makes sense that presidents are permitted to invest in U.S. Treasury bonds, right? And the rule also explains why wealth management solutions like blind trusts have long been accepted as workable resolutions to problems of conflict of interest. They don't always seem on their face like they really would work. Certainly the Trump blind trust, which wasn't a blind trust, doesn't meet that definition, but other people's blind trusts might have been workable solutions. It certainly doesn't provide clearance, though, for all profits derived from discretionary fair market value transactions where the president is obviously and individually on one end of the sale. A key move in the Justice Department's brief is to rely heavily on a point of dubious significance. It asserts that in every published OLC or Comptroller General opinion in which proposed conduct was determined to involve prohibited emoluments, the determination involved an employment relationship or a relationship akin to an employment relationship with the foreign government. If you think about it, there's at least one common sense explanation for the limited precedent. In general, the government employees on whose behalf these opinions were sought probably didn't own hotel chains, lucrative licensing agreements, or hundreds of trademarks from which they derived significant foreign-based or domestic government-based income. Their thing of value as civil servants was their skill set. And we know Donald Trump doesn't have a skill set, so that's not likely to enter into the picture either. Their thing of value as civil servants was their skill set, and thus the relevant question was whether they were constitutionally permitted to lend out that skill set to foreign governments or organizations with foreign state ties for payment. A 1986 OLC opinion written by then Deputy Assistant Attorney General Samuel Alito cuts against the assertion that whether the profit in question is derived from employment or personal services should be by itself dispositive. There, Alito determined that a NASA employee could indeed accept a fee for reviewing a PhD candidate's thesis for an Australian university. To get to this conclusion, Alito made two significant moves. First, uncertain as to whether a public university should be regarded as a foreign state, Alito instead decided to turn to the features of the proposed consultancy and consider whether they raised the kind of concern that motivated the prohibition's enactment. This marks a functional, purpose-driven approach to the question of permissible benefits. Second, he suggested the following facts weigh against finding the fee a prohibited emolument. 1. The NASA scientist was not selected because of his position within the U.S. government. Okay. The fee was an ordinary amount given the service to be rendered. 3, there was no reason for the officer to have direct contact with the university officials. And 4, the consultancy was limited in both time and in substantive scope, and no continuing relationship was anticipated. Note the fact that the scientist would be acting in an employment or personal services capacity, that did not automatically render the payment an emolument. This is the key takeaway from this opinion, and it is at odds with the Justice Department's claim that employment is the make-or-break issue when it comes to determining whether a benefit or payment is an emolument. Second, consider the implications of the first and fourth points Alito highlighted. The scientist's selection for the job and associated payment has nothing to do with his U.S. office. I mean, presumably you would be happy having that guy review a PhD's work simply because he's an accomplished aerospace engineer or scientist, I assume, if he's going to be working at NASA. Although the fact that they work at NASA probably, I don't have much doubt that increased the prestige in having the work reviewed by that particular person, but maybe not. It doesn't hold all of its utility, I guess. Where were we with this one? Second, right, consider the implications on the fourth points. The scientist's selection for the job and associated payment had nothing to do with his U.S. office, which is not a conclusion that can be readily drawn about the services purchased by foreign and state government employees newly flocking to the Trump International Hotel. It's not, I don't think anybody's making the argument that it's either the best hotel ever or just the only one available or has the lowest prices. No. But this possibility is undercut by Alito's, we skipped a bit here. It may suggest the permissibility of accepting profits from truly routine transactions by truly routine hotel customers, including some government diplomats. But this possibility is undercut by Alito's reference to the extremely limited nature of the permitted relationship and transaction in question. The Justice Department is understandably leaning hard on the idea that an emolument must be received specifically as a function of office or employment. After all, without this very specific qualification, its argument for the permissibility of accepting profits from ordinary transactions falls apart. Two OLC opinions make this clear. A 1982 OLC opinion determined that the Foreign Emoluments Clause barred an employee of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission from working on his leave time for an American firm contracted by a Mexican government agency to review the design of a government-owned nuclear power plant. Woo. And a 1993 OLC opinion concluded that law firm partners serving as non-government advisors on the Administrative Conference of the United States could not accept partnership earnings where some portion of that share is derived from the partnership's representation of a foreign government without triggering the constitutional prohibition. Can you imagine the accounting on this? What a headache. In the 1993 opinion, the OLC actually dismissed the argument that the conference member was not subject to the foreign government's control as not decisive. Instead, the OLC concluded that the portion of partnership profits the conference member would receive would be a function of the amount paid to the firm by the foreign government, such that the partnership would in effect be a conduit for that government. And think about now, they're being such hard asses because they were afraid that foreign governments might make payments to a law firm in order to influence one member of the Administrative Conference of the United States. That is a far-fetched theory, but it stands to reason. Now, imagine influencing the President of the United States. That's a far cry from influencing a single member of the Administrative Conference of the United States. What does the Administrative Conference of the United States even do? That's a good question. Let's see if we can't call that up. Curious now. Conference. There we go. Let's see. The Administrative Conference of the United States. Should we go to their webpage or to the Wikipedia page? Wikipedia will probably serve us better for the radio purposes. The Administrative Conference of the United States is a nonpartisan independent agency of the United States government established in 1964 by the Administrative Conference Act, unsurprisingly. The conference's purpose, here we are, is to promote improvements in the efficiency, adequacy, and fairness of the procedures by which federal agencies conduct regulatory programs, administer grants and benefits, and perform related government functions. To this end, the conference conducts research and issues reports concerning various aspects of the administrative process, and when warranted, makes recommendations to the President, Congress, particular departments or agencies, and the judiciary concerning the need for procedural reforms. Wow, it's right up our alley. Obscure as hell. Of these recommendations, 33% have focused on reducing government costs and increasing revenue. This is interesting facts. 26% on improving the use of science in the administrative process, and 20% on reducing litigation in the regulatory process. That seems unlikely. Implementation of conference recommendations may be accomplished by direct action on the part of the affected agencies or through legislative changes. Why is that important? They were standing in the way of this payment on the grounds that it was an emolument in case a foreign government decided to hire the law firm that this one person worked at or was a partner at for the purposes of influencing one member of the Administrative Conference of the United States, the power of which is to suggest to elected legislators or duly appointed federal regulators elsewhere in the government that they might consider these suggested proposals put forward by a body of such people, only one of which is a partner in the firm possibly hired by a foreign government. That's how sensitive they were to foreign emoluments at that point. But the President of the United States, no, nothing to see here. Everybody move on. That is an interesting point, and a fine one at that. Okay, let's see. Where did we leave off on this one? The administrative conference. We were just talking about that. Okay, so acceptance of that portion of income, that would be the partnership shares at the law firm that came from a foreign government. Acceptance of that portion of income was therefore a prohibited emolument. OLC, by the way, reconsidered this opinion in 2010, it says, but only with respect to whether the members held an office of trust for the purpose of foreign emoluments clause. That's interesting. I don't know whether they were also talking about somebody else from the Administrative Conference of the United States, but that's a good question. Is somebody who is on an advisory body that makes suggestions to other governmental bodies that they might find certain ways of reforming their procedure and administrative process, and they don't have to take that suggestion. Is that enough of an office? Is that really an office of trust under the Constitution? I mean, it is sort of, but how much trust? Well, anyway, in these opinions, the OLC simply did not care that there was nothing out of the ordinary about the payments in the cases from a transactional or fair market perspective. This runs contrary to the crux of the Justice Department's argument for the innocuousness of Trump's business-related foreign and domestic government income. The textual kicker in all this is that even accepting the Justice Department's insistence that emolument is best read to mean profit arising from an office or employ, it doesn't follow that all ordinary business transactions are okay. What if those transactions are, in number or value, enhanced by the prestige of the president's office? Couldn't the profit thereby derived, then constitute a profit arising from an office or employ? And an update included here. This is a line of argument that Marty Lederman compellingly and more thoroughly details in a linked argument. But it is to prevent this reading that the Justice Department argues that prohibited benefits must arise not just from the office, but from the provision of services pursuant to that office. But this argument relies on a stunted conception of the power that an office of profit or trust confers. To lift an example wholesale from Ben Whitty's, lots of borrowing from fellow lawfare writers here, if Trump owned a nondescript hot dog truck outside the White House that charged the same price for hot dogs as any other food truck and sold them to some incidental foreign customers, that would not be problematic under this definition of emoluments. If the truck were Trump branded and either charged inflated prices or enjoyed inflated sales because Trump is president, and Saudi potentates lined up to put cash in his register, that would seem to constitute impermissible profit arising from an office as a textual matter and in view of the historic comptroller and OLC perspective. At base, this is what plaintiffs are claiming, that the profits Trump is enjoying arise from his office. So arise from may be a definitional phrase the Justice Department is interpreting too narrowly. Trump's status as the most powerful man in the world, he loves to say that, I'm sure, affects his business transactions, which are self-branded to boot. Not only is he enjoying booming business as at his his exclusive properties, in part thanks to foreign guests reportedly seeking to get in the president's good graces, or maybe even hear national secrets, but he's also won Chinese trademark protection that, according to plaintiffs, he would not have received had he not become president. Finally, on a practical note, notice the perverse upshot of the Justice Department's fixation on employment and personal services as the place where the river divides. This assertion that payments for goods and business-related services is permissible, but payment for employment and personal services is not, means that a president can't profit off his own brain or body when it comes to cash from foreign sources or U.S. government entities, but can, almost without limitation, profit off the brains and bodies of those he can afford to employ in his private capacity. It's what you might call a constitutional free pass for super-rich presidents. The comptroller and OLC opinions do not support such a result. They repudiate it. Interesting. You see what's being argued here is, in other words, if it's all about employment in services, if you have to personally provide services, if you don't do it with your own hands, the stupid definition that the Justice Department and OLC are trying to put forward make it possible. In other words, if I don't do that job that you're trying to bribe me to do, but I hire somebody else to do that job or to accept the money so that it doesn't have to come directly to me, that gives you a free pass in all this, in this ultra narrow interpretation. And that can't stand. Ultimately, the Justice Department's view of emoluments marks a departure from the public comptroller and OLC opinions in at least two critical respects. First, the new position is a clear abrogation of the practical spirit of the Constitution analysis on which the comptroller and OLC have consistently relied to ensure a stringent rather than forgiving interpretation of what constitutes an impermissible benefit or undue influence. And a large parenthetical inclusion here, referencing various OLC opinions and comptroller opinions over the years, including ones from 1955, 81, 83, and 1962. A 1962 OLC opinion noting the sweeping nature of the constitutional prohibition. The OLC's 1980 memo citing a 1902 Attorney General opinion stating the Foreign Emoluments Clause is directed against every kind of influence by foreign governments upon officers of the United States, and the prohibition should be given the broadest possible scope and application. But that's way back in 1902. Who cares about that, right? Second, the Justice Department's quite specific argument that the president can profit from employing people to do business with foreign countries and government entities in the United States amounts to a strange carve-out, one that allows extremely wealthy officers with people in their employ to cash out as they wish on the advantages that the prestige of their office confers without any consideration whatsoever of the sources of that cash. This interpretation is flatly at odds with executive branch tradition. I have yet to see a single opinion that has permitted an officer to collect profits even arguably enhanced by the power of his office, much less categorically benefit from discretionary, indeterminate transactions that foreign governments and U.S. government entities may enter into at will. Note the issues I did not address here. Is there any, really? What is not yet a point of debate in these particular lawsuits is whether these constitutional provisions apply to the president at all. The Domestic Emoluments Clause applies to the president by its express terms, and in its recent motion, the Justice Department doesn't dispute Cruz's claim or the OLC's pre-existing determination that the more obliquely phrased Foreign Emoluments Clause applies to the president as well, and notwithstanding the occasional argument to the contrary. And there's a linked one in here. In addition, as the suits proceed in federal court, we can expect much of the legal discussion to focus on jurisdictional hurdles. There's a strong argument that the courts don't have a role to play, and that presidential corruption rising to the level of an emoluments violation is a political question, whose resolution properly lies with Congress. Though the congressional suit spearheaded by Senator Richard Blumenthal and Representative John Conyers alleges that Trump has failed to come to Congress for requisite permission in accepting foreign emoluments, Congress's best recourse could be impeachment proceedings. Or if it so chose, Congress could avail itself of a lot of options short of impeachment, but in the words of Charles Black, Jr., circa 1974, what an enormous if. Recall that the House of Representatives has the power to demand Trump's tax returns and has not exercised it. But as for the substantive question of whether the comptroller and OLC of yore would have signed off on the Justice Department's blessing of all monies flowing into Trump's coffers by way of business transactions, the answer is no. I should have read that last paragraph first. That was an awfully long exposition of it, and you'll never hear it read to you, certainly on any other radio program. Maybe it shouldn't have been read to you on this particular radio program. But look, it's a holiday, and you can fast forward through it. I should have told you that at the beginning, but then you would have missed out on this fabulous legal education. The fine points of a good legal argument, entertaining occasionally to the procedural mind. I don't know whether that will entertain you on July 4th today, but what a way of celebrating America and the American system of justice, truth, justice, and the American way. Damn it. Somebody had to say it. Okay, let's see. Definitely a couple other items here that reminded me I might want to share with you. Let's see, how are we gonna, is there a natural segue that can be made here? Probably not. We're just gonna have to jump into the rest of what we've got here that looks so interesting and worthy of mention. Let's see. I've got this piece here, I guess continuing on from what we discussed Friday and then enhanced a little bit on Monday in finding Dana Hull's tweet from the other day, highlighting the issue and the timeline, really, of Republican congressional knowledge of Russian interference in campaigns in general throughout Europe and the West, and possibly, well, eventually in the United States as well. We discussed it a little bit. The recorded conversation of June 2016, during which Paul Ryan and other congressional Republican leaders are heard to acknowledge their understanding of and worry about Russian interference in free elections in Western democracies other than the United States. The conversation, though, eventually turns around to the possibility of interference in American elections, including the bribing of Donald Trump himself, which they all now claim to have been laughing off rather than laughing nervously. But then, of course, all of that is enhanced by, one, earlier reports that the CIA and FBI became aware of such efforts in the United States and indeed briefed the so-called Gang of Eight, the top party leaders in each house of Congress on both sides of the aisle, who are required to get briefings of these kind whenever something of national security import arises, like this. So we know that the recordings tell us that in June of 2016, the habit of the Russians in some other countries, at any rate, is acknowledged by Kevin McCarthy and Paul Ryan and others. We also know from from the testimony of the top officers of the CIA and FBI, or former top officers anyway, that they likewise briefed the bipartisan leadership of Congress in August of 2016, specifically about their concerns about Russian interference in the American elections. Further, we also know that Mitch McConnell actually at that point went out of his way to use all the leverage he could to prevent the administration, then the Obama administration, and law enforcement and national security officials in that administration from doing anything about the interference or making any public proclamations about the interference just to raise awareness about them. He threatened instead, should they try to do anything to mitigate the interference by the Russians, he'd be calling fouls and saying this is interference on behalf of the Democratic Party and the Democratic candidates by the Democratic incumbent president, and impermissible in that sense. And of course, certainly their Republican partisan base would have bought that excuse. I don't know whether any of the independent or even Democratic base would have believed any of that, but he successfully prevented the United States government, because it was run by Democrats, and because he knew, I think that the tape that we mentioned proves it, plus the developments of yesterday's stories that we discussed, the stories from over the weekend, further information about the Peter Smith interference in terms of trying to come up with Hillary Clinton's emails, it makes it pretty obvious in three different situations that top Republicans, operatives, and elected members of Congress, finding out that Russians were interfering in elections around the world, and specifically in elections in the United States, not only didn't do anything to block that interference, but prevented anyone else from doing anything to block that interference, because and why would they do this? Why would they, as Dana pointed out yesterday, why would they not have worried that as top elected officials of the United States government, their elections were in jeopardy from this Russian interference? And the only really obvious answer is they had advanced knowledge. Oh, it's a supposition, certainly, but that they had advanced knowledge of the fact that the Russian interference was designed to benefit Republicans and hurt Democrats. And since they were Republicans and they were contesting those elections against Democrats, they were literally fine with the Russian interference. They were pro-Russian interference because they were putting party before country. It was an attack on the United States election integrity, and they were okay with it and signed off on it because they had word beforehand that this would inure to the benefit of their party. That's the evidence of collusion you've been looking for. It's out there in plain sight. We just need to convince more people to read the background of it. I have this particular piece here from Share Blue, which is of course going to be a little bit partisan in its slant, but a piece written by Matthew Chapman that cites at least one example of the Republican realization of the import of these pieces of circumstantial evidence. Again, I have to stress, circumstantial evidence, still evidence. Take one piece of circumstantial evidence, offer it up as proof of something, and someone will say, why, that's just circumstantial evidence. It's when you offer 3, 4, 5 different pieces of circumstantial evidence, it is cumulative. It does tend to build on itself, and alternative innocent explanations for the actions described in 3, 4, 5 different pieces of circumstantial evidence become very difficult to come by at some point. So what has Matthew Chapman written here? Under the headline, Pro-Trump Pundit. This pro-Trump pundit says new reports could prove path to collusion between Trump and Russia. I guess he's only willing to concede a path to collusion and not the collusion itself. Who's the right-wing pro-Trump pundit? Why, it's none other than Hugh Hewitt, who's not smart. And maybe we shouldn't take that conclusion of his as any kind of a golden ticket here, but it's well worth noting. Let's take a quick look at the piece here. It would be hard to find a bigger supporter of Donald Trump or a more ardent apologist for his open corruption than Republican MSNBC contributor and talk radio host Hugh Hewitt. That may overstate the case somewhat. There are bigger supporters and more ardent apologists out there, but not very many of them. Certainly not many for whom I have less respect in general. But okay. Hewitt has played dumb about Trump's incitement to violence against political opponents, defended Trump's decision to fire James Comey for investigating members of his campaign, and parroted Trump's baseless conspiracy theories about President Barack Obama wiretapping Trump Tower. Hewitt is so desperate to make Trump look good that he once even apologized for asking Trump a foreign policy question he could not answer. And while Hewitt has spent months denying there is any evidence Trump was involved with Russia's interference in our election, once calling the allegations baseless, on Sunday, Hewitt finally admitted there is a possible way Trump's inner circle could have been working with Russian hackers. During a panel discussion on Meet the Press, Hewitt noted that new reports from the Wall Street Journal and Lawfare, we've read them both, show a path to collusion if the evidence bears out. And I guess we do need to have that caveat. We are accepting the stories that we read in Lawfare and the Wall Street Journal as being factually true, and that has not yet necessarily been established. It hasn't been disputed effectively or disproven in any way, but I guess we have to assume that the attempt is coming, and it might be persuasive to some people. We'll have to wait and see. Here's an excerpt from the exchange on Meet the Press, and we'll read it rather than play it here, so we stay somewhat within copyright bounds here, or at least auto-detect copyright bounds. It's Chuck Todd speaking. At first, of course, he writes this, and it's under the headline, "The Time I Got Recruited to Collude with the Russians." That would be, of course, the story we read yesterday about the consultant who was approached by Peter Smith to try and verify the authenticity of what he believed were Hillary Clinton emails that had been hacked by Russians, okay? So he writes this. You remember the story, "The Time I Got Recruited to Collude with the Russians." And he begins to read it, saying, "It is no overstatement to say that my conversations with Smith shocked me." You remember this from the story yesterday. "Given the amount of media attention given at the time to the likely involvement of the Russian government in the DNC hack, it seemed mind-boggling for the Trump campaign, or for this offshoot of it, to be actively seeking those emails. To me, this felt really wrong. They," that meaning Smith and his colleague, "had a reckless lack of interest in whether the emails came from a Russian cutout. Indeed, they made it quite clear to me that it made no difference to them who hacked the emails or why they did so, only that the emails be found and made public before the election." And I don't know whether we didn't get all the way through the article, so it may have possibly been, I think we got to a part that at least made that same point, and it may just have been restated later in the article, but I don't think that's any mystery to you, based on if you only heard what we read yesterday and didn't read the rest of the article. So he asks now, Hugh Hewitt, what do you think of that? Hewitt has to answer this way. "Well, until this point, there has been no evidence of collusion." No, the evidence has been there. It's been weak and circumstantial, but now we're beginning to get some factual assertions anyway that, if true, do tend to prove that those bits and pieces of circumstantial evidence describe the very situation that actually occurred. Yes, okay, fine. Having clarified for Hugh Hewitt, we move on. He continues by saying, "And I was on the show with you when Shane, the Wall Street Journal reporter, joined and broke the story on Meet the Press daily. And it changes it because it gives a path to collusion. I do think it adds gray. It's smoke." And now Chuck Todd says, "Well, it's smoke and there's a gun. We just don't know if the smoke and the gun is from that gun." Or he means the smoke being from that gun. That's weirdly stated, but you get it. Hewitt answers, "And Mueller is going to put out do not destroy memos to everyone." And it's a good memo to get, by the way. Just don't destroy things in general. "And Flynn will be questioned about this. And if there is a connection between Smith and Flynn, then there is a path to collusion. But there is no collusion evidence yet." Yes, there is. There absolutely is evidence of collusion. There's no collusion proof yet. There's plenty of evidence that tends to prove that there was a connection. And you've come up with nothing so far that denies the connection. There is absolutely collusion evidence, and there's a distinct lack of evidence to the contrary, but yet we say it has not been proven. That's about as far as I'm willing to go with you there, Hugh. But continuing with the Share Blue story, again, by Matthew Chapman, we're back out of the Meet the Press section here. Hewitt is referring to a story first broken in the Wall Street Journal by intelligence expert Shane Harris, which details the actions of the late Republican operative Peter Smith, you know this, who attempted to obtain stolen Hillary Clinton emails, or what he thought were such emails, from Russian hackers for Trump campaign officials, and subsequently worked to cover up the involvement of the Trump campaign. Shortly afterward, British cybersecurity expert Matt Tate wrote a follow-up piece in Lawfare, we read it yesterday, or at least partially, revealing Smith had extensive ties to disgraced former National Security Advisor and noted spy Michael Flynn. There is already extensive evidence that Flynn knowingly rewarded the hackers by discussing possible removal of U.S. sanctions with Russian diplomats, and that he illegally accepted money from Russian officials. But the evidence from Shane and Tate goes further. It suggests Flynn may have actually sent intermediaries to work with Russian spies as they conducted cyber warfare against the United States. This is a sweeping interpretation of things, to be sure, but it's not yet disproven by anything we've seen. When confronted with this new evidence, Hewitt may have qualified his response and insisted there is no hard proof that Trump's team colluded with Russian hackers, but even he was forced to admit there is a possible way they could have. Little by little, the resolve of GOP media personalities continuing to defend Trump against the mounting evidence, and it is evidence, of Russian collusion is starting to falter, and Trump has no one to blame for that but himself. I think a pretty good illustration of exactly what's going on here, and a nice example of, I don't know, I guess I hesitate to say that Hugh Hewitt has any integrity, but I guess he just found himself trapped in the obviousness of it all, and he had to give up the ghost, at least on camera, facing the fearsome Chuck Todd. Well, you know, everybody's got their weaknesses. Okay, let's see. I had another piece here that I think we can continue on this story arc with, and I don't know, I'm not clear on where this, is this a blog? I guess it must be, electionado.com, and I am not familiar with it, but it came to my attention following the publication of both the Wall Street Journal and Lawfare stories. And it looks like it's basically a storify of tweets from one, oh my goodness, we're going to have to work on this pronunciation, T.R. Ramachandran, who tweets as Yatta Point. I don't know what that's supposed to mean or how to pronounce it. YOTTA POINT, like Yatta Point. It sounds to me like you got a point, maybe. I don't know. Anyway, this, well, let me open up the Twitter profile just to see if there's any descriptive information here to help us put this in context. T.R. Ramachandran says he is head of Canvas Inc., Kanvz Incorporated. Canvas or Canvas. Oh, look at that. It offers the simplest way to create a blog, website, or even place for tweet storms. That's why why Electionado, whatever that is, was being hosted on Canvas.com. But he spells Canvas Kanvz. We might prefer the spelling of Canvas. Okay, well, anyway, so I guess this is sort of his own opinion and conjecture based on the stories, but I was impressed with the take he was putting together. He says, here's circumstantial evidence that some in Trump's circle beyond Peter Smith knew what he knew in August of 2016. Let's take a look here. Does this just link to this? Is this, it's difficult to tell exactly what yeah, it links back to itself. Very interesting because it's a collection of his tweets. So we'll have to read this tweet storm. The second, Matt Tate described interactions with longtime GOP operative Peter Smith, who wanted to expose/leak some Hillary Rodham Clinton emails, right? And that referencing the time I got recruited to collude piece that we read in Lawfare. Last night, this was a couple nights ago, I said, there's been something that's puzzled me for months, which the Wall Street Journal and Tate stories helped clarify. An important dot has been bugging me for months. Wall Street Journal and Tate were a godsend. That puzzle starts to make more sense now. That puzzle relates to contemporaneous comments by Roger Stone in the fall of 2016, which makes a lot more sense now after the Wall Street Journal and Tate stories. Let's start with two of the key facts in Tate's story. And he's got a screen grab that's highlighted here. He's saying what he's highlighted for us is One thing struck me as particularly disturbing. This is Tate's piece here. I expressed my view that the hack had likely been orchestrated by Russia and that the Kremlin was using the stolen documents as part of an influence campaign against the United States. I explained that he should take very seriously the possibility that this may have been part of a wider Russian campaign against the United States, Smith, pointing to a number of occasions where U.S. officials had made it clear that this was the review of the U.S. intelligence community as well. Smith, however, didn't seem to care. From his perspective, it didn't matter who had taken the emails or their motives for doing so. He never expressed to me any discomfort with the possibility that the emails he was seeking were potentially from a Russian front, a likelihood he was happy to acknowledge. If they were genuine, they would hurt Clinton's chances and therefore help Trump. Part of what Chuck Todd read to Hugh Hewitt, and that Hewitt had to conclude was evidence of, finally, that collusion. There was more, and the next tweet in the storm says, in fact, Smith told the Wall Street Journal that he was aware that the hackers were likely working for the Russian government, which is a remarkable thing for a private individual in June or July to have concluded. Even the intelligence community hadn't made that public yet, and may or may not have briefed the campaigns at that point. For somebody who claims to have been unconnected to the campaign, that's pretty interesting. And again, a highlighted screen grab that says, we knew the people who had the emails, were probably around the Russian government, Mr. Smith said. So he had come to that same conclusion. The emails Smith wanted to discuss with Tate were not emails from the DNC hack, as we learned, but allegedly deleted personal emails from Hillary's private server. Again, a highlighted section of the Tate text, which reads, yet Smith had not contacted me about the DNC hack, but rather his conviction, and remember, it's all a personal conclusion on the part, as far as we know, of Peter Smith. All indications from official channels were that Hillary Clinton's private email server had not been hacked at any point. But for some reason, Peter Smith, before this became public knowledge, before the intelligence communities informed even the campaigns, I think, that they suspected Russian interference in the American election and that Russians were behind a broader program than just the, by that time, already revealed hack of the DNC emails, and I guess of Podesta's emails as well. Smith had concluded that all of the conclusions of the intelligence community and investigative committees that Hillary's email server had not been hacked were wrong, that they had been hacked, and that the deleted emails were in the possession of those hackers, and that those hackers were connected to the Russian government. This he had all concluded on his own, and was looking for some sort of confirmation from other independent sources, and in this case, Tate. So Smith, at this point, says, no, I'm not talking about the DNC hack. I'm talking about my private conviction, essentially, that Clinton's email server had been hacked, and it had been done almost certainly by the Russian government and likely other hackers too, and he wanted to expose all of that. Very interesting conclusion for him to come to. First, Smith, the tweet storm continues, was doing this shortly after Trump called on Russia to find, hack, and leak those Clinton emails. More importantly, Trump hoped Russia would hack Clinton's work email server and leak those emails to the media. There are a couple of examples of him tweeting just that. Trump, that is. Second, Trump was quite obsessed with Hillary Clinton's deleted emails in her private server, tweeting and talking about it often in late July and August. Beyond the stolen DNC and Podesta emails released by WikiLeaks, Trump's focus on Hillary's deleted personal emails continued all the way to Election Day, 11/8. We know what happens when Trump is obsessed with a topic. He wants something to be done about it. Cough, cough. And he wants someone to take care of it for him. My people should take care of it. Now, the firing was about Russia investigation and not the emails, right? And I guess here, excuse me, we're talking about, he's in Twitter shorthand here. He's talking about Comey's firing. Remember now that the firing was about Comey's interest in the Russia investigation, not the emails as they were portraying it to be. Remember when Trump was trying to portray, or Trump's circle anyway, was trying to portray it as a firing based on Comey's improper and unfair treatment of Hillary Clinton by screwing with her by saying 11 days before the election that, or hinting, allowing Jason Chaffetz and other congressional Republicans to hint that the investigation had been reopened in some criminal capacity when it hadn't been. That was a nonsense cover for the firing, and Trump put that to rest pretty quickly by telling television interviewers, no, it was about Russia. So remember, the firing's about the Russia investigation and not the emails. Trump has been screaming about it, and now he wants it to go away. Third, another odd thing that was going on at the same time with Roger Stone. August 9, Roger Stone claimed he communicated with Assange and that the next leaks might be tied to the Clinton Foundation. Remember, he's alleging this stuff back in August. That puzzled me, our writer says, since all public Clinton Foundation-related emails until then were from Clinton's private server, emails she had voluntarily disclosed. In other words, Stone was implying that WikiLeaks had been given access to non-public deleted emails from Clinton's private servers by some hackers, I guess. Sure enough, on August 12th, Stone claimed WikiLeaks had access to emails deleted by Hillary Clinton's aides. This was on CNN. Again, those would have been emails on Clinton's private server, where her aides had also had personal email accounts, not Podesta, not the DNC. Stone continued with this through August, also citing back channels with Assange, and suddenly brought up Podesta on August 21st. Throughout August, aside from the prescient note from Podesta, Stone was convinced WikiLeaks had access to deleted emails from Clinton's private servers. That was interesting because there was no evidence that the server had ever been hacked, and it's not like the FBI doesn't have the tech to find those same emails. Fourth, however, August and early September is when Peter Smith was approaching tech experts, convinced also that Russian hackers had emails from Hillary Rodham Clinton's server. Both Smith and Stone seemed very aware that Russian hackers were using WikiLeaks as a cutout in this situation. And time to play our outro music. Hope I can finish this up. Very well aware that Russian hackers were using WikiLeaks as a cutout to leak stolen documents. Tate and the Wall Street Journal pointed out that Smith was well connected within the GOP, apparently with close ties to Flynn. So, it's quite plausible that Smith communicated within Trump circles about Russian hackers having Clinton server emails, and Stone was in the same circles. It may have been, then, that Stone spilled the beans and is another, I mean, we always figured that he was another point in this circle, in this growing pyramid, really, of circumstantial evidence. It really ought to be considered just that. I'll give you the link to read the final exciting conclusion to the tweet storm of T.R. Ramachandran for yourself. We'll be back on Wednesday, tomorrow, both with Greg Dworkin and, of course, Joan McCarter to update you on what has happened since today's exciting conclusion to the story. What's up next on the after show? Yes, it's a live after show. Justice and Wink standing by to bring you these stories. Members of yet another teenage robotics team denied visas to enter the United States. Amazing. This time from the West African nation of Gambia, which really hasn't been much in the news in terms of travel ban, but all of a sudden makes it on the list. Plenty more, of course, including the head of the Florida NAACP finding a Confederate battle flag on her lawn this morning. Gee whiz, where could that have come from?
From Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.
And do stay tuned for the last after show as well, when they'll be visiting with Chris Reeves, who you may know as Tom Servo 433, for his usual discussion, this time an open letter to Democrats, progressives, and the unaffiliated, and the just concerned voters about all the problems we're having inside of the Democratic Party and without, plus more, next.